The African Climate Foundation will participate as a sponsor for the South African Pavilion at the 2021 Climate Change Conference in Glasgow in Scotland. The event, also known as COP26, is the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference. It's scheduled to be held between the 31st of October and the 12th of November. For more on this, I'm joined by Saliem Fakir from the African Climate Foundation. He's the executive director for that organization. Mr. Fakir, a pleasure to have you on the program this afternoon. And let's speak firstly about the participation of the African Climate Foundation as a sponsor for the South African Pavilion at COP26.
Yes, I think it's our actual first COP as a young foundation. We only 1 year, 7 months old. We are based in South Africa, but we will operate across the continent. So it's actually a very good, wonderful privilege for us to have participate and co-hosted with the South African government, the National Business Initiative, and other members of the South African Pavilion. So there will be a couple of events, showcasing South Africa's work, and also we will have events talking about the new Presidential Climate Commission, as well as Africa-Europe relationships. So fantastic moment for us, and we look forward to it.
So speaking about this fantastic moment, for those who aren't quite familiar with the United Nations Climate Change Conference, what would you say is the significance of this meeting?
So this meeting is quite significant because, the U.S. had pulled out of the Conference of Parties during the Trump era, and Biden has basically brought the U.S. back to the negotiations.
Right.
And I think people are pressing for greater action globally. The U.S., China, the European Union, and most of the advanced economies, including emerging economies that are high coal emitters, including South Africa, have to play a collective role. So if we don't get very bold and strong actions to meet what they call a 1.5 degree goal by 2050 and beyond, it will be very dismal, I think. So therefore, everything rests on this event, which was delayed because of COVID. So you can imagine the crisis COVID has presented. And so we are also keen that the outcomes of the COP can rejuvenate economies, particularly emerging economies and economies in Africa. So this is really fundamental.
So the topic around climate change has been leading the conversation, especially matters around carbon emissions and the impact this is having on the planet, and also this drive towards the use of renewables to help address some of these issues. Why should South Africans really care, and why should we get involved to help or find solutions to these environmental problems?
So South Africa is very dependent on coal. Almost all our electricity is generated from coal. A substantial amount also of coal is used for liquid fuels through Sasol. And therefore, South Africa, in comparatively to the rest of the continent, is one of the biggest emitters of carbon emissions. But coal globally is coming under pressure. You just heard Xi Jinping, the Premier of China, for example, announced at the United Nations that China will no longer fund any coal outside of China itself. And so we see, for example, as a foundation and also our colleagues in other foundations and institutions that are involved in monitoring and tracking coal expansion around the world, certainly a global decline in coal within the next couple of decades. And that will translate also in no new financing of coal plants, potentially anywhere in the world. And South Africa will have to wean itself off coal dependency. We have aging coal plants, which we should try to take them out of life as soon as possible.
Right. And
we ought not to build any more new coal plants.
So
just to talk about the renewables aspects of this, I think the cost of renewables have come down significantly in the last 10 years. And in fact, we've proven it in South Africa itself. We ran a very successful renewables program. It was called the Renewables Independent Power Producers Procurement Program. And we've shown how the cost could radically be brought down for wind and solar technologies.
Right.
And we think that this is of benefit to Africa to diversify its electrification program through broadening the base for renewables in different parts of the continent and become less and less dependent on fossil fuels. There are other reasons for that as well, which have not only got to do with climate.
So when we started our conversation, we spoke about what to expect to take place at COP26. But what do you expect to be high on the agenda, on the matters to be addressed at this particular meeting?
So a lot of it is revolving around the better ambitions, because as the International Energy Association or agency has pointed out, that the current commitments by governments, which are largely voluntary, will not be sufficient to avoid the kind of climate change effects that are already starting to manifest all around the world. So we have to do a lot more. So that's number one. We need to raise between $6 to $7 trillion in finance to fund the delivery of energy transitions globally. And in Africa, we need about $2.5 trillion in order to do that properly. And thirdly, the amount of finance that's available through the climate negotiations and process of the $100 billion is insufficient to meet the need for radical energy transitions in order to meet that goal of 1.5 degree that the UN FCCC, or Paris Agreement, is trying to achieve in order to meet the requirements of what they call science. So that's really the topmost part of the agenda. For Africa, it matters that we are the most vulnerable continent as far as the impacts of climate change go. We are the least lowest emitter globally. I think we are around 3% of carbon emissions actually are produced within Africa.
Right.
We're also a major store of carbon through our forest and land that is not really particularly pristine land that's under nature conservation. So Africa is both an asset in terms of a major sink for carbon, but it's also a major continent that is vulnerable to climate change. So we have to also find funds to support our ability to adapt and to become more resilient to the effects of climate change.
That's Saliem Fakir. He's speaking to us there about the COP26 meeting, which is expected to take place a bit later this month, and what to expect, and also South Africa's participation in this year's conference.